Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki tepapa tongarewa ko Kat Tokuingawa. Good evening everyone and welcome to Tepapa. My name is Kat. I'm one of the public programming team who have been supporting the Natural Hazards Commission Tokatu Ake to put on this evening's event series. We're really excited to have everyone here tonight for the first of our three-part talk series, the Active Land Talks. I'm just going to be up here very quickly to do our karakia and also some health and safety before I pass over to Nina and the rest of the speakers. Tū taua mai I runga, tū taua mai I raro, tū taua mai I roto, tū taua mai I wao. Kia tau ai, te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. So a few health and safety points before we get started. If anyone needs the wharepaku, the toilet at any point, it's just round the corridor to your right and off to the left. In the unlikely event of any sort of emergency, please look out for myself or one of the host team. They're wearing red cardigans. I was saying that, but they're not actually at the moment. They're wearing black event tops, and they will show us the way out and what we should do in that circumstance. Here's a good reminder to turn your phones on to silent, and also you're welcome to take photographs, but please turn the flash off. Please note that tonight's talk is being live streamed, so welcome to our online viewers. It's great to have you here. And it will be recorded and put online as well after the talk. So that means that if you know anyone who was unable to join us tonight, please do share that. We will share it after the event as well. If anyone is online, we will remind you of this later, but one of our Tepapa members of staff is monitoring the chat, and we can also ask any questions you have during the Q&A. So I'm really excited to hand over to this evening's talk and speakers, and this series is going to highlight the amazing range of researchers that we have through our partnership with the Natural Hazard Commission Tokatu Ake. So Natural Hazard Commission are one of Tepapa's longest standing founding partners, and it's fantastic to be able to use this opportunity to kind of share some of the work that they do outside of opportunities where they fund partners like Tepapa and other museums. So I'm now going to hand over to Nina. She is the Senior Advisor in Science Communications at NHC, and she's led the development of this talk series. As I say, this is the first of three, so please come back and join us for others if you've enjoyed it. She is going to introduce our wonderful speakers in more detail, but we have Lauren Vanel, Catalina Miranda, and Julia Becker from the Joint Centre for Disaster Research at Massey University. So enjoy your evening.
Thanks, Kat. Nau mai haere mai, on behalf of the Natural Hazards Commission Tokatu Ake, a very warm welcome to the first of our Korero Whakarua Moko Active Land Talk series. Thank you for braving the cold to be here with us tonight. I'm Nina, and I'm a Senior Science Communications Advisor at the Natural Hazards Commission. I'll be introducing tonight's topic and speakers and facilitating the question and answer session afterwards. So together with Tepapa, we've planned this three-part active talk series to showcase some of the ways that science is helping us prepare for natural hazards. You might know that New Zealand is one of the riskiest places on Earth for natural hazards like tsunami, volcanoes, and earthquakes. But a silver lining of living in such a risky place is that it attracts and grows a bunch of really smart people who are interested in helping us understand and prepare for these hazards. And we're really pleased to feature many of them in our Active Land Talk series, including our three excellent speakers tonight. So our mission at the Natural Hazards Commission, until recently known as the Earthquake Commission, EQC, is to reduce the impact of natural hazards on people, property, and communities. So we invest in research that helps us understand our risks and then share that knowledge with New Zealanders so that everybody can make informed decisions about the impact of natural hazards on their homes based on the best available science. And this talk series will feature some of the people working to build a more resilient New Zealand through science and research. So tonight we'll hear about research into the psychology and behavior of people facing natural hazards. What should we do? And when we know what to do, why don't we often do it? How can we be better prepared? These are really big questions, but luckily for us, our speakers will give us all the answers. We have psychologist Dr. Lauren Vanel, civil engineer and social scientist Dr. Catalina Miranda, and associate professor Dr. Julia Becker. All three of our speakers are from the Joint Centre for Disaster Research based in Wellington. The JCDR is a world leader in emergency management education focusing on people. It offers New Zealand's longest-running courses on developing community disaster resilience. Welcome, we're really excited to have you here. So I'll begin by introducing each speaker, who will have about 10-15 minutes to share their mahi, and then we'll conclude with a Q&A session afterwards. So please do save your questions until the end. So first we have Dr. Lauren Vanel. Lauren is a lecturer of emergency management at the JCDR. She's a psychologist with expertise in behaviors during disasters, public education campaigns, and social psychology. She's passionate about understanding how people think about and respond to natural hazards, and often appears on TV and radio to remind us about the importance of disaster preparedness. So please join me in welcoming Lauren.
Wonderful, thank you so much for that introduction, Nina. So yeah, as Nina says, I'm Lauren, very excited to be here with you all this evening. So my background is psychology, so this isn't lie on a couch and tell me your problems kind of psychology. I use the scientific method to try to understand what motivates people to act in certain ways. And the context for my research is natural hazards. So just because I'm the first speaker and the first talk in the series, I thought I should just briefly remind you guys of some of the natural hazards that we have to think about. So Nina's mentioned a couple. Do we have any ideas from the audience about some of the natural hazards we might need to prepare for? Fire, yep, that's a good one. That hasn't been mentioned yet. Volcano, yep. Not too much of a concern in Wellington, fortunately, but definitely other parts of the country. Cyclone, yep. Tsunami, yep. Sorry? Slips, yes, awesome. Yeah, great job, guys. So I think you covered most of those. So basically in Aotearoa, you name it, we've got it, which makes it really exciting to do research, but means that it's really important that we talk to people about preparing. So I think you've covered pretty much all of these. Great job, guys. So the first question that we need to ask is, what do we mean by preparing? And the first thing I want to say here is that you'll hear me talk about preparing, getting better prepared, rather than saying, you know, prepared or not prepared. What we don't want to do is set up this idea that preparing is a yes or no. You're either prepared or you're not prepared. Because what we don't want people to think is, I have to do all of these things I'm being told to do to be prepared. It's too much, so I'm not going to bother doing anything. Every single step that you take will make you more prepared for when these events happen. So what sorts of things can you do? Any ideas what sort of steps you can take to be better prepared for a natural hazard? Anything you've done or know that you should do when you go home tonight? Yep, yeah. Any other ideas? Have a great, yes, that's a great one. Thank you, Sally. Cool. So there's lots of different things you can do to be better prepared. We traditionally spoke about what we call survival actions. So these are your storing food, water, having a first aid kit. These are still really, really important because we know in Wellington you may have to go days up to potentially weeks with what you've got stored at home. Still really important, but we're sort of going a bit broader in terms of the things that you can do to be better prepared. So there are all sorts of things that you can do around your home. And the Natural Hazards Commission has some great advice for this. So things like securing tall furniture so it can't fall on you in an earthquake, through to more sort of structural actions, which Catalina will talk about later, things like securing the foundations of your home. We also know that it's really important to make plans. So this is plans within your household, so it could be your flatties, your family, your whānau, but also within your community and your neighbourhoods, because we also know that in the immediate hours after an event, it's going to be the people around you who are going to help you. So do you know who your neighbours are? Do you know who might need help? Do you know who might be able to help you? And the final one that we think about is called psychological preparedness. So we know that people cope better after these sorts of events if they know what they might experience, what they can expect, where to go to get information. All these sorts of things will help you cope better during an event. So lots of different things that you can do to be better prepared. The next question we need to ask is, are people preparing? Because if Kiwis are already doing all of these things, that's great, my job done, I can retire. Not quite how it works in reality, unfortunately. So you can see, based on this graph, just looking at that blue line, we see a good chunk of Kiwis have taken steps to prepare, so sort of between 40 to 50%, but it hasn't really changed over the last decade and a bit. We see these spikes after major events that last anywhere between a few months and a few years. But ideally, we want to get those numbers up, and we want to get them up before the big event, because you need to have done the preparation to help you during the event. And one of the usual suspects that we think about when it comes to motivating people to prepare is risk perception. So if you don't think these hazards pose a risk to you, you're not going to prepare for them. That makes sense. But there's this been idea that the more risk you perceive, the more preparation you're going to do. But in reality, it actually looks more like this. So as I said, if you don't perceive any risk, you know, who cares? Why do I need to bother preparing? Not going to prepare. Makes sense. But we also know that if you go too far in the other direction, if people see the risk as too big, too extreme, then they don't see the point in preparing. This is too big, there's nothing we could do, I'm not going to bother preparing. So we need to be really careful when it comes to communicating the risk to make sure we're hitting that sweet spot at the top of the curve. So what I just talked about, this idea that, you know, disasters may be too devastating to bother preparing, this is a belief called fatalism. There's a whole range of these beliefs that stop people from taking preparation actions. Another one that's really relevant in our context is called unrealistic optimism. So even if we can get people to realise, okay, this might happen, it might be bad, people will say to me, but I'll be all right. There might be a big earthquake in Wellington, it might be bad for my neighbours, but I'll be okay. And when you ask them to explain that, they can't. Another one that I hear all the time in Wellington is this normalisation belief. And this is the idea that future events will be like past events. So people will say to me, well, I've been okay in every earthquake I've felt in Wellington, so I'll be okay in every earthquake in the future. And this is another one that people say with extreme confidence, and when you ask them to unpick the logic of it, it very quickly falls apart. One of the ideas of this campaign from Civil Defence, the Never Happens Happens campaign, was to address some of these beliefs. So reminding people that these events do happen and that they can impact you by breaking down what it might look like. So you might lose water, you might lose power, to try to make the impact of these risks more concrete so that it's harder for people to ignore them, to use these beliefs to sort of protect themselves. But generally, it's quite difficult to shift these. So these relate to how people see the risk itself. What we can do instead, it's much easier, is we can try to change how people see the behaviour of preparing rather than the risk they're preparing for. So I'm just going to run you through 4 of the problems and some of the solutions that we typically see when we're talking about communicating the behaviour of preparing. So the first problem, one of the big ones, one of the classics, it's all throughout the academic literature, is this idea that preparing, it's just too much, it's too hard. People don't have the skills or the time or the knowledge or the resources to prepare. There's lots that we can do to try to address this problem. So we can start by encouraging people to try something easy. So learning your hazards doesn't take very long, it's free, it's easy, but it's really going to help you be prepared. Making a plan, again, free, easy. Also going to be really, really helpful in an event. And even some of those like survival actions, things like storing water, this doesn't, again, have to be a big burden. Anytime you finish a big soft drink bottle, just clean it, fill it with water, store it somewhere if you can. So you may have seen, for example, this recent campaign from the National Emergency Management Agency called Have a Prep Talk. So preparing can be as simple as thinking about your neighbours. Who might need help? Who might be able to help you? The next problem. This is another big one. It's this idea that preparing is not going to be helpful. We know for people to do something, they need to understand the why of it. So it's really important in our communications to emphasise how these preparation steps are actually going to help people. So for example, do you know someone who's benefited from preparing, who's been through an event and has gotten benefit from actions they took? So an example of this is our annual Shakeout earthquake drill, where we teach people drop, cover and hold, which is what you should do in an earthquake to protect yourself. But that's not enough. We need to tell people why we're telling you to drop, cover and hold. So we tell people drop, because most of the injuries we see in earthquakes are from people being thrown off their feet. So dropping means that you can't be knocked over. It's going to massively reduce your injury risk. So, people are going to be more likely to use these actions when they understand what the benefit is. Next one. So we know that Kiwis think they should be preparing, but they tell us, oh, no one else is preparing. I don't want to be that weird disaster prepper, overreactor, so I'm not going to do it. So we need to make preparing normal. So for example, if you haven't done a lot because you think you don't want to be that weird disaster prepper, have a chat with your friends and family. Chances are, if we go back to those stats I presented at the start, around 50% have taken steps, chances are you know someone who's getting prepared. Another way that we can try to make preparing normal is to get individuals who are well known or well liked within society and get them to demonstrate the behaviour. So going back to the Shakeout earthquake drill that I mentioned, back in 2015, part of the promotional campaign, so this was a couple of years after the Hobbit movies came out. I'm a little bit biased because I'm a massive Lord of the Rings fan, but I thought this was great from a research perspective too. They got Peter Jackson and Richard Taylor in the ads, showing people drop, cover and hold, encouraging them to get involved in the Shakeout earthquake drill. So that's another way that we can make preparing normal. The last one I want to talk about, it's quite exciting for me because it's really intuitive. A lot of what we find is common sense, but because we're scientists, we want evidence for it. And my team was actually the first to find evidence. Surprise, surprise, people aren't preparing because they think it's boring. Makes sense. No one wants to do something tedious or dull or unrewarding. But there are lots of ways that we can make the experience better. We can improve the experience. So for example, communicators like me can use humour. I've heard some giggles. Hopefully that's kind of working. But we can also find ways to make preparing fun and rewarding. So for example, we can make it a game. So our colleagues at the Washington State Emergency Management Division over in the US, they have guidance on how to do what they call a home hazard hunt. So this is where, with your flatties or your family or just yourself against the clock, you try and identify as many hazards around your home or your workplace as you can. For example, things that could fall on you during an earthquake. Whoever finds the most in the time wins. And then, of course, you would take steps to mitigate those hazards, because it's all well and good knowing that they're there, but you also need to do something about them. So those are just some examples of some of the things that we think about when it comes to talking to the public about preparing for natural hazards. So for me, the main sort of take-home messages from the research I've done, the research I've read, it's really important that we communicate the risk. People need to know what they might face, what they might experience, but we also need to tell them what they can do. We don't want to just scare people with these big things could happen to you. We also need to empower people with the steps they can take. But it's not just the what. Encouraging preparation, it's also about the how and the why. People aren't going to do something if they don't understand the reason for it. And we can encourage people to start with easy actions. We also know that it's hard for people sometimes to think about, oh, you might have earthquake and tsunami and flood and wind and storms and all of these big scary things. But there are lots of steps you can take to be better prepared for a range of hazards. So for example, if you lose power, regardless of why you lose power, do you have what you need to cook and clean and communicate? So there's heaps of information and resources out there for you to learn more. So our friends at the Natural Hazards Commission, Aotearoa, they have great advice on a lot of these different types of preparing, whether you're a renter or a homeowner, for example. They also have the new Natural Hazards portal, so you can learn about the hazards you might face where you live, work and play. And then of course our friends in emergency management, so in Wellington region, and nationally have great resources and guides, everything you need to get better prepared for natural hazards. And that's me, thank you.
Excellent, thank you, Lauren. Not only excellent insights, but also excellent use of memes, so thank you for that. Next, we have Dr. Catalina Miranda, a civil engineer and research fellow at the JCDR. Originally from Chile, Catalina brings international expertise in earthquake engineering. Her research focuses on understanding and reducing damage to houses caused by natural hazards. So please join me in welcoming Catalina.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Thanks for the introduction. So yeah, I'm Catalina, and probably those words over there, the title, means a lot of different things to all of you, building and strengthening. And in this talk, we are going to continue to talk about natural hazards, but we are going to focus on earthquakes, because that's what I know the most. So probably means different things to different people depending on your background and your experiences and so on, and also whether you are a homeowner or you're a tenant as well. So I hope you can take some things home regardless if you're a homeowner or a tenant. We'll talk about that in a minute. So we are in Wellington, and you're probably aware that we go through a lot of shaking and a lot of even tiny earthquakes during the year, and we are kind of preparing for the next big one. And we have a lot of tall buildings in the CBD, a lot of old buildings as well, I have to say. They're very nice, but they're old. And you've probably seen this sign. If I ask here, have you seen that outside of your building? Cool. Well, not really cool, but I'm not going to talk too much about that because that focuses on tall buildings, and the idea of the earthquake-prone building policy is to identify vulnerable buildings, right? So then we can retrofit them or demolish them in a period of time. It's very complicated, and that's for a different talk. But today, we're going to focus on timber-framed houses. Because, finger crossed, how many of you live in a timber-framed house like that in Wellington? Oh, I see a lot of people. Amazing. Yeah, me too. Well, I don't live in Wellington anymore. But I used to live in a house like that. They're very popular. And now, okay, seriously talking, 80% of our Wellingtonians live in a timber-framed house in Wellington. And I'm a timber fan. I like timber structures. They're very resilient. But although they're very resilient, they have suffered a lot of damage after earthquakes. After the last earthquake that we've gone through in New Zealand, they've suffered a lot of damage, and it's probably the biggest cost that we have to pay to recover. And not just economically talking, but also emotionally talking, because it took years to get back the houses to what it was before the earthquakes. So with the next slide, yes, that's coming. I don't want to scare you about like, oh, my house is probably vulnerable to earthquakes. But we're going to talk about some vulnerability characteristics that you can identify in your houses are very easy to identify. So they're more vulnerable to earthquakes than others. So there, as I said, different factors might influence the performance of your house. So for example, if you have the same house located on a flat ground, and in that house also located on a slope. The house located on a slope is probably, research says, and that it's probably going to perform slightly worse than the house located in the flat ground, because there is a weakness, I would say, or it might be a weakness in the subfloor area. Because it doesn't have too many walls, it maybe doesn't have too many bracing, so, and also it might have concentration of openings in one side of the house, because who doesn't like an amazing view, right? When you live on the slope, you want to have the big windows to look at the city or the sea or whatever. So those are vulnerabilities, but when they are addressed properly, we're all good. And then talking about plant shapes, so research have shown that houses that are more irregular than regular ones, like our lovely villas that are very square, because engineers love squares. The irregular ones tend to perform slightly worse than the regular ones. Did I say regular? Irregular ones tend to perform slightly worse than the regular ones. Another characteristics are the age of the house. So engineering knowledge evolves all the time. We are learning all the time how to make things better. So all houses were designed with previous standards and probably even without standards. So we have to bring them up to standards, right? So that maybe that resonates with a few of you with the earthquake-prone building policy. It's connected somehow. So the age of the house also tells us how good or how bad the house might perform. So also we have the heavy cladding. I have a good example for this one. When we have cladding like that, the house might perform slightly worse than a house with a lighter cladding. Because imagine yourself with a big, huge, heavy hat, and then you go walking, and it's kind of like hard to keep the balance, right? Imagine if you go dancing, you're gonna be like, ugh. So when your house go dancing, it's like, oh, I can't keep it together. So it might have some issues. Another thing that I think it's important, that happened a lot after the last earthquakes, it's the damage to hot water tanks. So we use that a lot in New Zealand. And when they are not attached to the structure, they actually come off of the base that they're sitting. So if you can attach them to the structure, you can save a lot of you can go through less damage, I would say, and save money at the end of the day. And another topic that I'm very passionate about is what you can do in the foundations. So foundation of houses was the biggest issue after the last earthquakes in New Zealand. Because a lot of the houses suffered damage due to the poor foundation. So they didn't have connections between the house. This is the house, right? And this is the foundation, the piles. So it's not connections. The same here. So basically, the foundations are amazing for gravity. So they sit there. But then when you shake it, it kind of like, boom, right? So then the pile comes through to somewhere that we don't want the pile to be. So that happened a lot. So you can identify those sort of like lists of vulnerabilities in your house and do something about it. That would be great. But of course, I have to present you with some solutions, right? It's not like this is the problem and go home. Let's talk about some solutions. So what can we do? First of all, ask for help. And I'm happy to chat if you have any further questions. But also, I would recommend you to scan these two amazing QR codes. One it's basically the same checklist that I just provided, that you can go through. Oh, my house is, I see a few fonts, that's amazing. My house is like this and that, and you can go and see the things that you can do. They've done an amazing work, like the Wellington City Council in the Natural Hazard Commission. And they also, I know that the Wellington City Council can also direct you to an engineer. They can put you in contact with an engineer or with a builder in case you need further advice. So this is the first thing that I will do is like, let's figure this out together. No more phones up? Amazing, cool. So when we talk about seismic strengthening, people kind of like go, oh no, this is too much work. That's what Lauren was saying, right? I'm not gonna do it, this is too much. Yeah, it can be a lot, sometimes too much, but there is a thing called like for like, which means that you don't need to apply for consent, because as soon as we said, oh, you need to do this to your house and apply for consent and go through the city council process, people are gonna go, that's it, I'm not doing anything. So there are a lot of tiny things that you can do to your house to improve the future performance, the seismic performance, but you don't have to go through consent. For example, change a few piles in the house. You don't have to, not all, but if you change a few, you don't have to apply for consent. Of course, you're gonna meet the standards, right? I'm gonna show you the standards so you know what you are trying to aim for. Okay, that's the link, if you wanna scan the link, for the thing that you can do without consent, like for like. That's just an example. And then if you want to replace all the piles of your house, yes, you got to go and apply for consent. So there are different things that you can do in your house to improve the performance that you have to apply for consent. And then you have to work with an engineer or an architect or an LBP, like a builder, that can help you to go through the process. So they can do the consent application for you. If you want to scan the QR code, a lot of QR codes I know, but it's good. They're really good websites and PDF. I don't want to scare you with this picture. I know it's a lot, but this is just an example of what you can find in those websites in the standards. So when we were talking about what we can do to improve the performance of our foundations, for example, you can see here just tiny wires that you can connect the foundations with the house. So you can just do that, and that will improve the performance. Oh my God, there's research, like basically, I don't want to say a number, but a lot. Because I don't want to put like, oh, she said 50% and it's not 50%, but a lot. So these are just pictures from the standards that I'm going to give you, of course, the code, so you can go to it. And if you live in a house on a slope and the perimeter walls of the subfloor or the foundations don't have any bracing, like this one, or don't have any perimeter walls, you might be needing a couple of those. So this is the website where you can find those details. And this is what builders have access to and what they use to do the work. And I think it will be really important when we go through this type of strengthening to understand what they're doing. So we can have the conversation of what we want. And so the work that they do, the builders or engineers do, meet our expectations. So yeah, that's me. I hope you enjoy it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Catalina. Refreshingly few graphs and equations from a presentation by an engineer. And closing us off for tonight is Associate Professor Dr. Julia Becker, a renowned social scientist in emergency management at the JCDR. Julia's work covers a range of natural hazards and environmental issues, both in New Zealand and internationally. Her expertise includes perceptions, preparedness, community resilience, emergency management, and early warning systems. Welcome, Julia.
Thanks, Nina. Ko putuake te maunga, ko whakatane te awa, ko Julia Becker tuku ingoa. I grew up in Whakatane in the Bay of Plenty and experienced the Edgecombe earthquake. That was my first hazard or disaster, and so that's kind of where I came from and why I ended up doing what I was doing. But Lauren and Catalina have talked quite a lot about preparedness, so now I'm going to move into response and recovery type situations and then kind of do a bit of a loop back round to preparedness as well. So what am I going to talk about in terms of the response and the recovery context? So we can think about response in lots of different ways. We can think of it in the very short term. So for example, you feel an earthquake happening, you need to decide what to do in immediate response to that earthquake, or you might be getting a warning about a flood that's coming, or perhaps a tsunami that's coming, and you have to decide what to do about that. That's quite the immediate term response. That can go into a slightly longer response situation where you're responding to the actual event itself. So what's happened after earthquake shaking, what do you need to do to respond to that? And then into the hours, days, weeks and months afterwards, right through into recovery. And we've seen in the Christchurch and Canterbury context, obviously a very long recovery there following the Canterbury earthquakes, still ongoing. It goes on for years and years. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about warnings. And so many hazardous events need warnings. You can see a few of these in the pictures up there. So I've talked a little bit about things like tsunami warnings or flood warnings. There's warnings for fires. You can have warnings for volcanic eruptions. And even if we're thinking about the COVID pandemic that we've just been through, you can have kind of warnings come out about that. We had a lot of us had texts, emergency mobile alerts come out to tell us when there were different stages of lockdowns. So we can put out warnings for lots of different types of events. And there are different types of warnings as well. So we often immediately go and we think about official warnings quite often. But the very first type of warning is actually the natural warning. So for example, an earthquake is a good first natural warning for a tsunami. So if you feel a long or a strong earthquake, then there could be a tsunami coming. So that's your very first warning, and you might need to evacuate, go inland or go to higher ground. You won't necessarily get an official warning for something like that, because if it's an earthquake, for example, off the east coast of the North Island of New Zealand or near Wellington, you might only have 10 to 15 minutes. That's not enough time to send a warning, so that first warning of the earthquake shaking is your natural warning. We have official warnings, obviously, as well, so when there's a bit of time that we can have a warning sent out. It could be, so for example, an emergency mobile alert that comes up on your phone. It could be a warning that comes when somebody comes and knocks on your door and tells you that there's something happening, like there's flood waters rising. It could be a warning that comes out over something like social media or even a siren, perhaps. So these are official warnings that come out from agencies. And then the third type of warning is really the informal warning. So that's often where we're talking to lots of people. So, you know, what are your friends telling you? Are your friends telling you that something's happening, or have your neighbours come and knocked on your door and given you a warning about something that's happening? That's an informal warning where people are talking to each other and warning each other that something's about to happen and that you need to act on that. So I just want to give you a little bit of an example of my experience of a warning, just to kind of show you how tricky and difficult some of these things can be in terms of making decisions about what to do. And so I'm going to go from earthquakes into volcanoes now. So I'm going to tell you my experience of a laha warning. So you see in the picture there's Mount Ruapehu. That's a picture from the 95 and 96 eruptions. It's steaming away there, a bit of ash coming out. And you can see that in the picture that there's like a number of lahars that have come down the side of the mountain. So you can see them in the picture there. So Mount Ruapehu is prone to lahars. If it erupts, there's a lot of hot material that goes on the ice and the snow, and these lahars can come down the valleys. And you can see there's a hazard map which maps out some of these different lahar paths. And so I was holidaying on Mount Ruapehu several years ago now, probably over 10 years ago, and I was staying at Whakapapa village. They've got a nice little camping ground beside the river there, which is right in the way of a lahar path. And so I was just settling into the cabin, and all of a sudden I heard something go off, a noise, a siren, alarm, something like that. I couldn't quite hear from where I was. So I thought I'd go and investigate. So I wandered up through the campground, and I could hear what it was. It was a voice-activated alarm that was telling me something like, there is a lahar headed towards the village, evacuate now. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So then I wandered into the office, and I sort of said to the office, oh, your sirens are going off, you know, I wonder what's happening. There's just been a power cut. Maybe the sirens were tripped by the power, and they were like, oh yeah, we just had a power cut. Meanwhile, my husband, he took no chances. He was just running down the road, evacuating, going in the right direction, heading towards the Scotel, which is where you're supposed to go, and just getting right out of there. And eventually the power did come back on, and we worked out that the power had tripped the alarms and the siren had gone off. But then I reflected on that and I thought, I am a disaster researcher. I should know what to do. I should know that when I hear the warning, I evacuate and I leave and I go to higher ground, because I didn't know that there was no lahar coming. In all likelihood, there could have been a lahar coming. So that really made me reflect on, you know, the process of warnings. It's not necessarily just what you're what you listen to and what you respond to, but all of these other things that were going on for me trying to think about the warning and try and work out what it meant and try and confirm it before I actually did anything about it. So that was my experience. So I just want you to reflect a little bit on perhaps your experience of having a warning. And we often have experiences of fire alarms. People who are at work or if you're at school, you'll have these fire alarms and you might have to do something about responding to them. So what did you do last time there was a fire alarm? Just think for a second. I hear someone say? You evacuated straight away. Why did you evacuate straight away?
Because the fire alarm went off and there's some chances there will be an actual fire.
Yep. So you believe that there could be an actual fire? Anybody else got any reflections on why they might or might not evacuate? Hanamau, did I see your hand up over there? Exactly. So the key point here is we're not alone. There's no right or wrong answer. But really, it's more than technology, isn't it? It's not just hearing an alarm, hearing a message, and evacuating. It's actually a bit more of a process. There's more of a process going on here. And we often talk about these systematic, people-centred early warnings that include our technology, for example, so our monitoring systems, our warning systems, the actual warning that gets sent out. But it's really also important as part of that system to understand that there are other things at play as well. So you need to understand, like what Lauren was saying before, what's the risk? What are the hazards? What are the risks? What's the risk to myself? What are some of the issues associated with that? We also need to think about the dissemination and communication part of it. So if you don't get the warning, you're not going to be able to respond to it. So if there is some kind of technology involved, are people receiving that particular warning? Is it communicated to them? Do they understand it? Can they respond to it? And then finally, which is something I'll also touch upon, is this idea of response capability. So for warning systems to be effective, people actually need to know how to respond to those warning systems. So they have to have the ability to kind of understand what the warning means, to be able to interpret that warning, to be able to know what to do in terms of that warning. So if it's a tsunami, do they need to go inland or up to higher ground, or what do they actually need to do? And they need to have the self-belief that they're going to be able to act on that as well. So warnings, when people say it's just technology or it's just a message, it's not all that. It's actually broader than that. It's bigger than that. And some of our public education needs to respond to that and help us develop the capacity to respond to those warnings. So I've talked a lot about warnings, but I also just wanted to reflect briefly on this idea of sort of the shorter term response into the longer term response and into recovery situations. And really just wanted to briefly say we have had a couple of earthquakes, for example, in the last few years. So we've had the Cook Strait doublet in 2013 and the Kaikoura earthquake. They've all been relatively moderate events, still quite impactful, damage, disruption and impacts on people who've been living in the city centre. The Cook Strait earthquake, one of those earthquakes happened on a Friday afternoon, and it was carnage. People didn't know how to get out of the city. The transport was shut down, and so there's all sorts of questions around, what do you need to do at work to be prepared? What do you need to do in terms of a plan of how you're going to get home and how you're going to meet your family? So think back to some of those experiences, and they can inform some of your future planning. The Kaikoura earthquake, a different type of event, obviously happened in the middle of the night, but impacted a lot of apartment dwellers, a lot of people living in the city who had to evacuate out of their apartment buildings. some only short-term, but quite a long-term impact for a number of people who were not able to go back to their apartments or their homes for quite a long time. So some big issues to think about there around planning around where you might be, where you might end up, where you might need to go to in a big event, in an event that's even bigger than Kaikoura. So the key message here is really know what to do before an event. So as Lauren and Catalina were pointing out, preparedness is part of that. Being prepared and having some of those preparedness items, or having your house, I guess, ensuring that you're comfortable that it's safe and it's been fixed and modified as it needs to be. But also having some of these other competencies as well. So public and school education, obviously a key component of raising our awareness of what we need to do and doing that. Beliefs like the fact that I can do it, I can work with my community to do it. Building networks, really important before an event. And having communities, I guess, participate in some of those aspects as well. So one of the examples we often use is, there's a picture up here of the blue lines that were first painted in Island Bay, but there's many all around the city now and in Hutt Valley and in other places in New Zealand. But that was really a community initiative that was facilitated through some of the agencies like the council, and they ended up being lines drawn all over the city where people know that they can evacuate to. They know that if they go past these lines, that they are probably in a nice safe zone away from a tsunami. So initiatives like that where the community can get involved in kind of coming up with creative ideas and empowering them. And then finally, just practicing things like drills and exercises. So one of the reasons that fire alarms can be so successful, for example, is you've practiced it. You practice it once a year, you might practice it twice a year. The more you practice it, the better you get at it, the more you get used to it, the more you will know what to need to do straight away. So if we're practicing for things like tsunami, for example, and you're practicing your drill and you're practicing walking up the hill, when a real event actually happens and you feel that really big, long or strong earthquake, then you're going to be more likely to do that straight away in an actual event. So practicing in drills, very important. And even more important, I guess, when we know that we do have some of these really big hazards on our doorstep. So for example, the Hikarangi Margin earthquake and tsunami. We've got this nice big subduction zone off the east coast of Aotearoa. There could be an earthquake anywhere along there. There's just a little star here showing one example. But this type of event's going to give you a lot of shaking. It's going to shake for a long time, and a tsunami, likely tsunami as well. So just thinking about some of these things that might happen, and you don't have to think it's all too hard. You can get prepared. There's lots of little things you can do that will save your life and also save some of your property and, just look after your livelihood. So that's it from me. I think we did a full circle, and I think you'll hear about this a little bit more next week as well, with some of the, next month. The next time we have the active landscape talk, so I think some people are going to talk about this. So I'm going to finish on the get ready slide. So that's me, thank you.
Thank you, Julia. So now we'll move to the Q&A part of the night. So I'll have a seat, and this is an opportunity for you to hear more from our experts about anything that might have piqued your interest tonight. So if you have a question, please put up your hand, and a runner will bring a microphone over to you. And please do wait to ask your question until you have a microphone in your hand, because we have people online, and we want them to be able to hear the question as well as the answer. All right, so I think we have a question already. So the lady in the blue.
Hi there. Now the disasters, there have been a few fairly significant disasters across the world in living memory, but the warning, advanced warning, really strikes me as being something which can work against people's preparedness if, for example, I have in mind Hurricane Katrina, where repeatedly people were being warned these terrible climatic disasters are befalling us, and everyone, it kind of became normal. So how do you provide a proportionate warning which will actually engage people to do something rather than just say, oh, it's another one of those, we keep hearing this and it's kind of blah, blah, blah.
I think this is
Who wants to start on that one?
our question.
Yes, that's a great question. When we're talking about warning the communities, that's definitely something we consider. So what you've described is essentially warning fatigue. So this idea that people get so many warnings, they're really boring and they're not going to pay attention to them, particularly if they're getting warnings and they're not experiencing impacts. So it's something we really need to bear in mind about choosing when to warn people. Also, teaching people natural warnings so that they can, maybe if they don't pay attention to that official warning, they can pick up on the natural warnings. But one of sort of the big shifts at the moment is to do what is called impact-based warning. So it's not just telling people there's going to be rain. It's saying there's going to be this much rain, it's going to mean this. It's going to mean roads are closed, you can't get home. So that hopefully people take that warning more seriously because they understand what the event is actually going to mean for them. Anyone?
I think you covered that pretty well, Lauren. So, yeah, that was a good summary of that, yeah.
Excellent, thank you for that. Next question, Hidemoa.
Kia ora koutou. My question is around, once that impact warning is given, that's good. But I know that in civil defence we have the term no duff. And some of you would be aware of that, some may not. No duff means it's a real event. So when we talk about, when I was at the NEMA conference a couple of weeks ago, they did the health and safety briefing and said, if we say no duff, because this is that was a conference about hazards, in particular the AF8 exercise, if they say no duff, it means it's real. So what's the impact on letting the rest of the community know when a warning comes out, if we say no duff or no bluff, it's real? So that ignoring those warnings, there's something that's attached to it that means this is not just one of those practice things that's coming on hundreds of notifications on your phone and you're getting this warning. So that's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, I think this sort of gets into a quite philosophical question about warnings actually, because I would have thought we wouldn't be giving warnings to the public unless it's real and we want them to take it seriously. So for example, you might see with Met Service, they have watches when it's not at a warning level to get people to say, okay, this may happen, be prepared. I'm not sure. I mean, we know we do test warnings, so every year they test the emergency mobile alert. But that goes, I guess, as well to what Julie was saying about the importance of the communication around when people might get a warning, when they might not get a warning. So if people understand that you're only going to get a warning if your life is in danger, for example, is that how we use warnings? It's important for the public to understand the context in which they may or may not get a warning. And that could link into, are you only going to get a warning if there is an actual real event?
Before we move on to the next question, I realize I don't have a clock up here, so if someone at the back could just give me a wave, 5-2. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Kat. Hema at the back there, lady in the blue.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you so much for your presentations. And I was quite interested about the timing that warnings come out. And specifically, earlier this year, I was on the West Coast, and my sister lives in quite a rural area, so in other words, in the middle of nowhere. And when I arrived there, and she's got quite a big bush area at the back of her home, there was no bird sound. There was no birds, and I asked her, I said, don't you have any birds here? And she goes, isn't that strange? There's been no birds today. But the sound of the sea was loud. And so this was a whole 24 hours early that listening to what was happening in the environment, and the sea was very, very loud. And about 11 p.m. that night, we heard this massive roar from the ocean. We're not sure which direction it was coming from, but and then about 5 kilometres deep, this earthquake, this taniwha we called it, came through. And I just wonder how much, and also I had a look at the maramataka, the Māori calendar, to see, you know, what was happening, or what time, or what phase of the moon was available. And I wondered, is there much research being done around some of those natural tohu?
Julia, do you want to have a go?
That's a good question, but I'm probably not the right person to answer that, because I mean, I do know there are people who work in those spaces and try to understand some of those more natural warnings and how they kind of relate to the environment and what they can kind of tell us as well. So yeah, sorry, I probably can't answer your question, but I think it is a really important component of just really understanding our environment and how what these different things are doing, and how they can act as warnings for us as well, or messages for us in terms of what's happening with natural hazards.
Natural alert systems are a really fascinating topic. Do we have another question? A lady in the blue at the front there, or sorry, in the red. Sorry.
Kia ora. I was just wondering, do you guys have any resources for the more vulnerable people in our communities who we might struggle to get this education and information to? Like, for example, I work in mental health, and I often think about people who I work alongside, and their opportunity to learn about how to prepare for major earthquakes, medications, and things like that.
Sorry, could you repeat the
Sorry.
last part of your question?
That's a bit better.
Distraction.
Sorry, I just was wondering, do you guys have any resources for the more vulnerable people in our community? I work in the mental health service, so I often wonder about how I can best support the people I work with to be prepared for disasters like this.
Excellent question. Resources for vulnerable
Yeah,
communities.
so I mean, I guess the answer is probably yes, but probably not enough. But there are certainly resources that the National Emergency Management Agency has, for example, for perhaps people who might have certain disabilities. There's also a little bit of guidance out there on kind of psychosocial recovery and psychosocial response, but probably more work needs to be done in that space. So there is some information here and there, and happy to direct you to it if you want to find out a bit more about it. Yeah, I don't know if you guys want to add any more to that.
Excellent. So we have time for one more question, I've been told. The lady in the black there in the middle.
Hello. My question is around preparedness and response. If there are multiple events, how do we need to prepare and how do we need to respond? Happening at the same time.
So multiple events happening at the same time. How do we respond and prepare to that multi-hazard event?
That's a good question. So I guess that goes back to one of my final sort of takeaways was, disasters are not convenient. We do see them happening at the same time. So that goes back to the message of, when we're talking about preparedness, focusing on those actions that are going to help you for, a range of different hazards also means they'll help you if those hazards happen at the same time. I think what we try to communicate to people is when an event occurs, so in that immediate response, it's really important that you're quite kind to yourself and kind to others, because we know, like we saw, in the North Island with those severe weather events when they were hitting again and again and again, we saw a lot of people experiencing what we call disaster fatigue. So just understanding that in a situation like that where there's more than one thing happening at a time, it's really, really difficult to deal with. So you may not make the best decisions. It may be difficult for you to control emotions. So just as much as possible trying to be aware of that. And we also know that one of the best things you can do to cope psychologically in a response is to not deal with the problem and the emotions it inspires, but to deal with the actions that you can take to address the problem. So actually, just after an event has happened, that's a really good time to encourage people to take preparedness actions, because that action of taking steps to be better prepared, even if it's for next time, that helps people feel a lot better because they're focusing on the actions they can take, the tangible things they can do, rather than the emotions they're feeling. But like you say, it gets really complicated when more than one thing happens at a time, and that's something we're still researching, I think.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Lauren. So looking at the time, I think we'll wrap up there. So thank you very much for spending your Tuesday evening with us. And please join me in thanking our wonderful speakers again, Lauren, Catalina, and Julia. And finally, thanks to our tepapa partners, in particular Kat, Aroha, and the whole host team for all their behind-the-scenes work to bring this event to life, and for hosting us in the beautiful Te Papa Marae. As I mentioned, this is the first of our three-part series, so the next one is Tuesday, 13th August, same time, same place, but different group of experts. This time we'll hear from Wellington's leading geoscientists on the latest research into New Zealand's most active fault, which happens to run through Wellington. So we hope to see you there. I'll hand back to Kat now, who'll just close us with a karakia and give us directions for exiting the space. Thanks.
So yeah, just to echo Nina, a huge thank you to tonight's speakers and for giving up your time and sharing your research so generously with us. And thank you to Nina as well for all your work as our facilitator. So before we go, we'd just like to thank the Natural Hazards Commission, Tokatu Ake, one of Te Papa's founding partners. They've worked with us for more than 25 years, supporting our exhibitions and education program. And thanks to their generous funding through this partnership, we're able to connect museum visitors, tamariki and rangatahi, with vital information about Aotearoa New Zealand's natural hazard risk and what we can do to be prepared. So yeah, we hope you've enjoyed this evening. I also wanted to follow up one of the questions around the Te Ao Māori approach to resilience planning. Our third talk is looking at Mātauranga Māori and resilience planning, and that's on the 27th of August. So that might be a good place to explore some of those questions and answers. So please do come back for that. So I'm going to close us off now with our karakia, and I hope you all get home safely this evening. E rongo, ko te rongo a whare, ko te rongo a marae, ko te rongo a te hā, ko te rongo mai whiti. Kia hau mai ko te rongo, ko te maunga rongo, ko te rongo mau, e rongo, whakairia ki runga, kia tina, haumi e hui e, tai ki e. Thanks very much for coming.